There is a pause in the human story that no chronicle announces, no inscription marks it, no survivor speaks of it directly. And yet, when the Ice Age ends, something vast has gone missing. Tens of thousands of years of human presence narrow suddenly into a thin thread. Tools change, populations contract, genetic diversity collapses. Where there should be continuity, there is silence. Where there should be gradual transition, there is a gap. What happened in that silence, and why did so few remain? Long before writing, before memory could be fixed into symbol or stone, humanity endured its greatest erasure. At the end of the last ice age, when glaciers retreated and climates softened, the human population did not expand as expected. It shrank. Genetic studies now suggest that at one point, perhaps fewer than 10,000 breeding individuals carried the entire future of our species. Not a city, not a nation, a remnant, a fraction. This alone unsettles the familiar narrative. War had not yet arrived at scale. Agriculture had not yet bound people to land. No empire had risen to collapse. And yet the numbers fall so drastically that modern humans carry unmistakable genetic scars of near extinction. The bottleneck is real. It is measurable. What remains elusive is its cause. Archaeology offers fragments. Camps abandoned without clear explanation, tool traditions ending abruptly, regions once dense with life turning quiet. The megafauna vanish almost everywhere at once. Mammoths, giant sloths, saber-toothed cats, creatures that had survived countless previous climate swings, gone within a geological instant. Humans persist, but only barely. The Earth itself was unstable then. Ice sheets kilometers thick reshaped continents. Sea levels rose more than 100 meters, swallowing coastlines where humans had lived for tens of thousands of years. Entire worlds now lie underwater, inaccessible, unexamined. What was lost there cannot testify. Climate models describe abrupt cooling, especially during the younger Dryas, a sudden return to near-glacial conditions just as warming seemed secure. But climate alone feels incomplete as an explanation. Humans had adapted to cold before. They had endured harsher conditions with greater numbers. Why now, when conditions appeared to improve, did survival narrow so severely? Some researchers point to catastrophe layered upon instability. Evidence of massive wildfires appears in sediment cores. Strange materials, nanodiamonds, microspherules, have been found at the same boundary layer worldwide, though their meaning remains debated. Others resist these interpretations, cautioning against dramatic conclusions. The disagreement itself is revealing. Something happened, but consensus fractures around its interpretation. What cannot be denied is outcome. Humanity passed through a constriction so severe that all later civilizations descend from a tiny surviving pool. Languages, cultures, technologies, perhaps entire ways of thinking, vanished with those who did not endure. The survivors did not preserve the world that came before. They moved forward carrying fragments, not the whole. Survival, then, may not have favored the strongest, the most advanced, or the most knowledgeable. It may have favored those positioned away from disaster, those who moved rather than built, those whose knowledge lived in bodies rather than structures. If so, What does that imply about the world that was lost? The Ice Age did not end civilization. It erased something older, and what emerged afterward may not have been progress, but recovery, partial, uncertain, and incomplete. The human story continues, but from a narrowed origin shaped by absence as much as inheritance. And if nearly everything was lost once before without record or warning, how would we recognize such a threshold if we were approaching it again? If only a fraction endured, then survival itself becomes a misleading word. It suggests success, continuity, preservation. But the genetic record tells a quieter story, one of narrowing rather than triumph. When researchers began tracing mitochondrial DNA, passed from mother to child without interruption, they expected complexity, branching, abundance. Instead, they found convergence. A small number of maternal lines dominate all modern populations, as if countless others simply stopped. The same pattern appears in the Y chromosome, carried only through males. Here, too, diversity collapses into a few surviving branches. These are not metaphors. They are measurable constraints in the genome, signals that many lineages ended within a relatively short span of time. Whatever occurred did not discriminate by culture or geography alone. It acted broadly, but spared unevenly. This narrowing invites a question that history rarely asks. What does it mean to inherit the world from so few? Not merely biologically, but cognitively, culturally. When 99% disappear, what kinds of knowledge vanish with them? Skills transmitted through practice, navigation learned by movement, ecological understanding refined over generations, these do not fossilize easily. They die when teachers do. The archaeological record supports this loss. In several regions, stone tool complexity declines after the Ice Age transition. Blades become simpler. Techniques once mastered no longer appear. This is not the pattern of steady advancement often imagined. It resembles forgetting, a regression not of intelligence but of continuity. Some scholars argue that this simplification reflects changing needs. As megafauna vanished, hunting strategies shifted. As environments transformed, old tools lost relevance. But this explanation assumes smooth adaptation. The genetic bottleneck suggests otherwise. Adaptation occurred under extreme pressure when survival may have depended less on refinement and more on immediacy. In such conditions, groups fracture. Migration accelerates. Long-distance knowledge exchange collapses. What remains is local, provisional, reactive. Survival becomes narrow in both number and scope. The idea that only a small percentage survived also complicates narratives of progress. If modern humanity descends from a remnant, then much of what once existed was not built upon, but erased. Civilization, when it later arose, did not inherit a complete archive. It rebuilt from fragments, often unaware that something had been lost. This reframes the notion of primitive societies. What if some early cultures were not beginnings but endings? What if the simplicity observed in later Paleolithic layers reflects not emergence but aftermath? The absence of evidence becomes ambiguous. It could signify origin or disappearance. Genetic studies further suggest that surviving populations clustered in specific refugia, regions of relative stability, parts of Africa, pockets of Eurasia, where climate fluctuations were less severe. Survival favored geography as much as ingenuity. Those caught in zones of rapid change, flooding, or ecological collapse may have had no path forward, regardless of skill. This introduces an unsettling implication. Survival was not a meritocracy, it was contingent, accidental, determined by position rather than preparation. The future of humanity hinged not on who knew the most, but on who happened to be elsewhere. If this is true, then the world that vanished may have held knowledge that never reached us. Technologies adapted to environments now submerged, social systems tuned to climates no longer present, ways of understanding the sky, the seasons, the land, gone without record. The survivors carried forward what they could, but their inheritance was incomplete. Over generations, memory compressed. Myths replaced details. Symbols stood in for experiences no longer lived. What was once practical became allegorical. This compression may explain why later civilizations display sudden bursts of innovation, as if rediscovering principles rather than inventing them. Agriculture appears independently in multiple regions, not as a linear progression, but as parallel reinvention. Monumental architecture emerges with little apparent precedent. It is as though humanity remembered something vaguely, then rebuilt without instructions. But memory without context is fragile. It drifts. It reshapes itself around present conditions. Over time, origins blur. Stories harden into doctrine. The sense of loss fades, replaced by narratives of ascent. Yet, the genome does not forget. It carries within it the mark of reduction, a silent testimony to an event too large to narrate. The fact that all modern humans are closely related is not only a unifying idea, it is a warning. It means we have been close to ending before. This proximity challenges assumptions about resilience. Humanity survived, yes, but narrowly, and survival did not preserve the full spectrum of what it once was. It preserved only what could fit through the bottleneck. The rest disappeared without names. If only 1% remained, then history as we know it begins not at origin, but at recovery. A recovery shaped by trauma, scarcity, and forgetting. The structures built later, cities, hierarchies, belief systems, may reflect attempts to stabilize a world felt as unpredictable, even hostile. Fear becomes a legacy, control becomes a response, and beneath these responses lies a deeper uncertainty. If survival once depended so heavily on chance, what confidence can we place in our present narratives of dominance or mastery? The past suggests a different lesson, that humanity persists not because it is invincible, but because it adapts when nearly erased. The question that follows is unavoidable. If the Ice Age narrowed humanity to a remnant once before, and if modern systems now span the entire globe with little refuge beyond them, what happens if such a narrowing were to occur again? And would we recognize the signs in time or only afterward as another silence in the record? If survival narrowed to refugees, then the map of the ancient world must be reconsidered, not as continents and borders, but as gradients of tolerability. Ice did not advance evenly. Cold did not arrive everywhere at once. Some regions flickered between habitability and collapse, season by season, generation by generation. In such instability, memory itself becomes unstable. Geological records show abrupt shifts during the late Ice Age. Ice cores from Greenland preserve temperature drops occurring not over millennia, but within decades, sometimes within a single human lifetime. The Younger Dryas stands out most starkly. After a gradual warming, conditions reversed suddenly. Cold returned. Glaciers advanced again. Dryness spread. Ecosystems failed with little warning. To those living through it, this would not have felt like a cycle. It would have felt like betrayal. Groups adapted to warming climates found themselves exposed. Plants they relied on vanished. Animals migrated or died out. River systems altered course as meltwater surged, then froze again. Landscapes remembered by elders no longer behaved as expected. In such moments, knowledge becomes dangerous. Strategies refined for one environment can hasten death in another. The ability to abandon memory, to unlearn quickly, becomes as vital as experience itself. This may explain why cultural continuity fractured. Archaeological layers from this period often show abrupt abandonment. Campsites cease to be used. Tool traditions end without clear evolution. It is as if people moved on faster than their practices could follow. Where did they go? Sea level data offers a partial answer. During peak glaciation, oceans stood more than 100 meters lower than today. Vast coastal plains existed where water now covers everything. These regions would have been rich, temperate, biologically diverse, and attractive to human settlement. As the ice melted, these lands drowned. The process was not gentle. Meltwater pulses caused sea levels to rise meters within centuries, sometimes faster. Entire landscapes vanished within a few generations. Those who lived there did not retreat gradually inland. They fled, carrying what they could, abandoning what they could not. The archaeological silence beneath today's oceans is not emptiness, it is absence caused by submersion. Settlements, pathways, and possibly early structures now lie beyond easy reach, preserved in darkness or erased by currents. This loss distorts history. It privileges inland survival while obscuring coastal collapse. The survivors whose stories we inherit may not have been representative. They may have been peripheral. This inversion challenges assumptions about where innovation occurred. Coastal environments encourage navigation, fishing technologies, and long-distance contact. If such cultures existed and were erased by rising seas, their contributions may have vanished with them. What remains are inland echoes, simpler tools, smaller populations, reduced exchange. Not because inland groups were inferior, but because they inherited a broken world. The Younger Dryas may not have been a single cause, but a cascade. Some researchers suggest a cosmic trigger, a comet or asteroid fragment impacting ice sheets, igniting wildfires, destabilizing climate. Evidence remains debated. Microspherules, platinum anomalies, burned layers. None are conclusive alone. Together, they suggest disturbance. But even without impact, the system was fragile. Ice ages end chaotically. Feedback loops amplify small changes. Freshwater influx can shut down ocean currents. Wind patterns shift. Rain belts move. To humans dependent on seasonal predictability, such shifts are catastrophic. The idea that only 1% survived may not imply a single extinction event, but overlapping crises. Famine here, flooding there, cold snaps elsewhere. Survival depended on navigating a mosaic of threats, often without warning. This reframes extinction not as annihilation, but attrition. death by 1,000 disruptions. Attrition leaves little spectacle. No final battle, no singular ruin, just gradual thinning until populations fall below sustainable thresholds. Once numbers drop too far, recovery becomes impossible, even if conditions improve. Small groups face genetic risk. Social structures weaken. Knowledge transmission falters. Innovation slows. Survival becomes short-term. This dynamic may explain why humanity did not rebound immediately after climate stabilized. There is a lag in the record. Thousands of years pass before population density increases significantly again, before complex societies reappear. The survivors were not poised to build, they were recovering. Recovery often involves consolidation, simplification, narrow focus. Long-term planning gives way to immediate needs. In this context, the idea of a dark age before civilization may not be metaphorical. It may reflect genuine contraction. Myths from later cultures preserve hints of this contraction, stories of floods, of lost ages, of ancestors greater than those who followed. These are often dismissed as symbolic. But symbolism often arises from memory stripped of context. A flood is remembered because it was total, an age of giants because the past feels vast compared to the present. If the Ice Age extinction reduced humanity to a remnant, then cultural humility may have followed. The sense that something had been lost, though not precisely what. This sense can shape worldview. It can foster reverence for ancestors, fear of gods, suspicion of change. It can also motivate rebuilding, driven by the urge to reclaim stability. Agriculture may emerge in this light, not as progress toward abundance, but as insurance against unpredictability. Planting seeds creates future certainty. Domestication reduces reliance on wild cycles. But agriculture also binds people to land. It reduces mobility. In a world that had proven hostile, settlement becomes both refuge and trap. The survivors may have chosen rootedness because movement had become dangerous, because the open world no longer promised safety. This choice reshaped humanity permanently. The Ice Age extinction, then, is not merely about who died. It is about who adapted in ways that defined the future. The survivors carried forward strategies born of fear and loss, embedding them into culture. As populations grew again, these strategies hardened into systems that prized control over flexibility, storage over sharing, walls over wandering. Yet beneath these systems lingered memory, encoded in myth, ritual, and perhaps anxiety. A quiet knowledge that the world can change abruptly, that abundance is temporary. The genome remembers this vulnerability. The archaeological record hints at it. The myths whisper it. The question remains unresolved. If humanity survived once by chance and adaptation, does modern complexity make us safer or more fragile? Does global integration protect against collapse or synchronize it? And if another period of abrupt change arrives, will memory guide response? Or will the silence deepen again, leaving future descendants to wonder what disappeared this time? The Ice Age extinction does not end. It echoes. If recovery followed contraction, then the shape of what returned matters more than what was lost. After the ice retreated again and climate softened, the world that opened before the survivors was not the one their ancestors had known. It was quieter, emptier. Vast territories lay unclaimed, yet strangely unfamiliar. The animals were fewer. Some never returned. The land itself felt altered, stripped of old rhythms. This was not a reset to an earlier balance. It was a threshold crossed. Evidence from megafaunal extinctions underscores this shift. Mammoths, woolly rhinoceroses, giant ground sloths, saber-toothed cats, many vanished during the same broad window. The causes remain contested. Climate stress played a role. Human hunting may have contributed, but timing matters. These extinctions cluster around periods of instability, not equilibrium. For early humans, the disappearance of these animals was not merely ecological. It was cultural. These creatures shaped migration routes, hunting strategies, seasonal calendars, and symbolic imagination. When they vanished, so did entire ways of knowing the land. Survivors faced a paradox. The environment seemed more forgiving, warmer, greener, yet less predictable. Old keystone species were gone. New ones filled niches unevenly. Forests expanded in some regions, grasslands in others. The mosaic demanded experimentation. Experimentation favors flexibility, yet the survivors' recent history discouraged risk. This tension between opportunity and caution may explain the slow pace of re-expansion. Archaeological evidence suggests that even after climate stabilized, populations remained sparse for millennia. Humans did not immediately rush into every available space. They lingered near familiar corridors, river valleys, lakes, coastlines that reformed. Caution had become adaptive. In such conditions, social memory takes precedence over innovation. Elders who remembered hardship held authority. Their warnings carried weight. Stories of loss, even if distorted, functioned as guides. Do not wander too far. Do not rely on abundance. Do not trust the land fully. These are not conservative impulses by ideology, but by experience. The archaeological record hints at this restraint. Toolkits remained conservative across wide areas. New techniques appear slowly. There is refinement, but little radical departure. It is as if humanity paused, watching the world, waiting for confirmation that stability would last. Waiting can shape cognition. Extended vigilance heightens sensitivity to threat but dulls exploratory drive. Over generations, this can alter culture. Societies become more inward-looking. Innovation becomes incremental. Risk is shared reluctantly. Yet something else happens in emptiness. Imagination stretches. When landscapes are open and sparsely populated, the sky feels larger. Weather becomes more dramatic. Silence deepens. In such settings, cosmological thinking may intensify. The world appears governed by distant forces, sun, moon, stars, that seem more constant than the ground beneath one's feet. This may be the period when celestial observation gains prominence, not as science but as reassurance. The heavens offer regularity when the earth does not. Cycles of light and darkness persist even as climates shift. Stone alignments, carved markers, and early calendrical sites appear later, but their conceptual roots may lie here, in the post-extinction world, where predictability was sought wherever it could be found. At the same time, memory of catastrophe lingers in narrative form. Flood stories proliferate, tales of fire from the sky, of ancestors who lived in an age before ruin. These motifs recur across regions that could not have shared direct contact in the immediate aftermath. Such convergence suggests shared experience, not coincidence. But memory fades unevenly. As generations pass without direct exposure to disaster, caution softens. Children grow up hearing stories that feel distant. Warnings become ritualized. Eventually, they become metaphor. Metaphor invites reinterpretation. This may be where divergence accelerates. Some groups retain mobility, following animals, adapting continuously. Others settle, investing in land and storage. The latter choice promises security but accumulates risk. Settlement ties survival to place. Place can betray. Agriculture, when it emerges, intensifies this commitment. Fields require years of labor before payoff. Crops depend on weather patterns remaining within tolerable bounds. A single failure can cascade into famine. Why would survivors, with memory of instability, choose such a path? Perhaps because mobility had failed them before. During the Ice Age extinction, movement did not guarantee safety. Flooded coasts, advancing ice, collapsing ecosystems all punished those who could not anchor themselves. Agriculture may have appeared as control regained, the ability to produce food independent of wild cycles. Control, however, is brittle. Early agricultural sites show signs of stress, nutritional deficiencies, increased disease, social stratification. These costs were accepted, perhaps unconsciously, in exchange for predictability. Predictability, once lost, becomes seductive. This suggests that civilization's roots are not in confidence, but in trauma. The drive to manage, to measure, to store, to wall off uncertainty may stem from a deep collective wound. If only a small fraction survive the Ice Age bottleneck, then modern humanity descends from those who learn to fear unpredictability. That fear shaped institutions long before it shaped ideology. Over time, fear fossilizes into norms. Norms become laws. Laws become moral frameworks. The original cause fades, but the structure persists. This may explain why many early societies exhibit rigid hierarchies and strict codes. In unstable environments, deviation threatens survival. Conformity ensures cohesion. Authority concentrates to coordinate response. Yet authority also distorts memory. Those in power often control narrative. They emphasize continuity over rupture. They frame the present as improvement over a chaotic past. In doing so, they may suppress awareness of vulnerability. The deeper memory of near extinction becomes taboo. It survives only in myth, stripped of practical warning. As populations grow and technologies advance, confidence returns. Expansion resumes. Trade networks form. Knowledge accumulates. But the bottleneck remains encoded in biology and culture. Genetic studies confirm reduced diversity consistent with severe population contraction. Certain lineages dominate globally, suggesting descent from a small ancestral pool. This homogeneity masks fragility. It means that humanity shares common vulnerabilities. Shared vulnerabilities can unify, but they can also synchronize collapse. If the Ice Age extinction taught humanity to value control, modern systems have amplified that lesson. We have become adept at buffering variability through infrastructure, technology, and abstraction. Yet buffering delays feedback. Delayed feedback is dangerous. When systems finally fail, they fail abruptly. The ancient pattern threatens to repeat, not as ice advancing, but as cascading thresholds crossed. Climate, ecology, social cohesion. The survivors of the last bottleneck rebuilt with caution and reverence for forces beyond control. Over millennia, that reverence faded. Control became assumed. The question is not whether humanity can survive disruption again. It has before. The question is whether survival will look the same. If only a remnant persists, what values will it carry forward? Will it relearn flexibility or double down on rigidity? Will it remember the lessons encoded in myth or dismiss them as superstition? The Ice Age extinction does not merely belong to prehistory, it is a mirror held up to the present. The silence in the record warns not of ignorance, but of forgetting. And forgetting, more than cold or flood or famine, may be the most persistent threat of all. If forgetting was the deeper danger, then remembrance became selective by necessity. After the great contractions, memory could not preserve everything. It had to choose. What survived was not an accurate record of events, but fragments that were useful, images that could be carried forward without overwhelming those who inherited them. This may explain why early myths are vivid yet imprecise. They speak of floods without dates, of fires without origins, of ancestors without names. Precision would have anchored fear too tightly. Vagueness allowed distance. Distance allowed life to continue. But distance also allowed distortion. As populations slowly expanded again, groups diverged in how they handled this inherited ambiguity. Some leaned into remembrance, ritualizing loss, reenacting it through ceremony. Others turned away, prioritizing growth and mastery. Both strategies carried risk. Archaeology hints at this split. In some regions, burial practices grow elaborate, emphasizing continuity with the dead. Graves become sites of memory, layered and revisited. In others, remains are sparse, practical, almost dismissive. The dead are handled efficiently, as if to minimize attachment. Attachment can anchor, but it can also immobilize. The people who survived the Ice Age bottleneck did not merely face environmental collapse. They faced existential disorientation. Familiar landscapes vanished, animal companions disappeared, seasonal cues shifted. In such conditions, identity itself becomes unstable. Who are we when the world that defined us no longer exists? One response is to rebuild the old order symbolically. Totems appear, masks, cave paintings that depict animals already fading from reality. These images may not have been records, but acts of preservation, attempts to keep a world alive in representation after it could no longer be sustained in practice. This raises a quiet possibility that some of the earliest art is not celebration but mourning. Mourning has structure. It repeats. It slows time. It allows grief to be carried without consuming the present. If so, art becomes a technology of survival, not materially but psychologically. Those who could process loss without freezing may have been better equipped to endure long recoveries. Yet mourning cannot last indefinitely. At some point, it must give way to adaptation. The balance between remembrance and reinvention becomes crucial. Too much remembrance binds the future to the past. Too little invites repetition. The Ice Age extinction may represent the first time humanity faced this dilemma at scale. As environments stabilized unevenly, groups encountered one another again. They did not all share the same memory density. Some carried heavy mythic baggage. Others seemed lighter, more pragmatic. When such groups meet, misunderstanding follows. Archaeological layers sometimes show abrupt cultural replacement rather than gradual blending. Tools change suddenly. Art styles vanish. Settlement patterns shift. These moments are often framed as migration or conquest, but they may also reflect incompatibility of memory systems. Groups burdened by caution may have been overtaken by those willing to risk expansion. Those who forgot faster may have moved quicker. Speed has advantage until it does not. This dynamic could have played out repeatedly. Cautious survivors slowly displaced by bolder descendants who then faced new instability without inherited restraint. Each cycle erodes memory further. Eventually, the original trauma becomes unrecognizable. What remains are instincts divorced from context. Anxiety without cause, reverence without reason, rituals whose meanings are debated even by those who perform them. At this stage, institutions emerge to stabilize interpretation: shamans, elders, priests, figures who mediate between past and present. Their authority rests on memory management. They decide which stories are emphasized and which are softened. Authority simplifies. Simplification reduces ambiguity, but it also narrows understanding. As societies grow, simplification accelerates. Complexity becomes expensive. Clear narratives are easier to transmit across distance and time. They become doctrine. Doctrine freezes memory. Frozen memory resists update even when conditions change. This rigidity may explain why some early civilizations collapsed despite technological sophistication. They inherited coping mechanisms designed for different threats. When new forms of instability emerged, their responses were mismatched. Consider drought responses rooted in flood mythology or agricultural intensification in regions facing soil depletion. The strategies once effective became liabilities. From this perspective, collapse is not failure of intelligence, but of memory alignment. The Ice Age extinction set the template. A severe disruption forced rapid adaptation. Survivors encoded lessons into culture and body. Over time, those lessons drifted from their original context. When new disruptions arose, responses lagged. This lag repeats. What complicates the story is that not all memory is explicit. Some lessons persist biologically. Stress responses, risk aversion, social bonding patterns all may trace back to bottleneck conditions. These influences operate beneath conscious awareness. Modern humans still exhibit heightened sensitivity to scarcity cues. Food insecurity triggers outsized anxiety. Social isolation causes profound distress. Environmental unpredictability elevates stress disproportionately. These reactions may be calibrated for a world where small changes signaled existential threat. In a buffered world, they feel excessive, but when buffers fail, they become relevant again. This suggests that humanity oscillates between two modes, one shaped by acute vulnerability, the other by prolonged stability. Each mode produces different values, institutions, and blind spots. The Ice Age extinction forced a shift into vulnerability mode. The long Holocene allowed a drift into stability mode. Now, signals suggest a transition back. Transitions are rarely smooth. One danger lies in assuming continuity where none exists. Many modern systems presume gradual change. They optimize efficiency under predictable conditions. But the bottleneck history implies that change can be abrupt and nonlinear. Survivors of the Ice Age did not experience slow decline. They experienced thresholds crossed quickly: ice advances, sea level rise, ecosystem collapse. Threshold thinking is uncomfortable. It resists incremental planning, but it may be necessary. The silence in ancient records could reflect this discomfort. Events too sudden, too overwhelming, resist narrative. They become gaps. Gaps invite speculation, but they also serve as warnings. A warning does not require detail to be effective. It requires acknowledgement. The problem arises when warnings are ignored because they are vague. Modern science fills many gaps with data. Ice cores, sediment layers, genetic models, all reconstruct aspects of the past. Yet even with this knowledge, there is hesitation to integrate bottleneck thinking into policy and culture, perhaps because it undermines the assumption of control. Control has become a cornerstone of modern identity. To admit fragility feels regressive, but fragility acknowledged can become resilience. The survivors of the Ice Age extinction were not strong because they dominated nature. They endured because they adapted to its indifference. They learned humility, not as philosophy but as practice. Humility does not mean passivity. It means responsiveness. Responsiveness requires attention. Attention fades when comfort is uninterrupted. Thus, comfort becomes dangerous when mistaken for security. The ancient bottleneck whispers this lesson across millennia. It does not shout. It leaves traces, genetic, mythic, archaeological, and waits for recognition. Whether humanity listens may depend on how much silence it can tolerate. Silence makes room for memory to surface. Noise suppresses it. The question that remains is whether modern culture can create spaces where ancient lessons are not dismissed but reinterpreted, where vulnerability is not seen as failure but as information. If not, the next bottleneck may teach the lesson again, with fewer survivors left to remember it at all. If memory thinned through repetition and distance, then the question becomes not what was lost, but how loss was managed without language precise enough to describe it. After the Ice Age bottleneck, the surviving human groups did not inherit explanations. They inherited conditions. Cold, scarcity, uncertainty, and long recovery shaped behavior before they shaped belief. This distinction matters. Explanations can be debated, conditions cannot. In landscapes newly exposed by retreating ice, survival depended less on knowledge accumulation and more on pattern recognition. Where does water reappear after winter? Which animals return first? Which valleys warm sooner? Which remain hostile longer than expected? These are not abstract questions. They are lived inquiries, answered through repetition and failure. Failure in this period was unforgiving. The bottleneck did not merely reduce numbers, it compressed learning. Whole lineages of skill vanished. Tool traditions broke. Ecological knowledge tied to extinct species became obsolete overnight. What remained was adaptability itself. Adaptability, however, has no memory of its own. It requires input. This may be why early post-glacial cultures appear experimentally fragmented. Stone tool styles proliferate briefly, then disappear. Settlement patterns shift erratically. Diets diversify and contract. There is trial without certainty, exploration without map. Archaeology often interprets this as innovation, but innovation implies intention. What we see may instead be improvisation. Improvisation under pressure produces uneven results. Some groups find favorable niches and stabilize. Others misjudge thresholds and vanish. This selective process continues quietly, shaping regional outcomes without leaving dramatic markers. The silence of mass extinction is replaced by the murmur of micro-failures. Over time, these micro-failures accumulate into patterns. Groups that align with emerging climates persist. Those that cling to outdated strategies fade. This is not ideological selection, but ecological sorting. Yet humans are not passive in this process. They remember what works. Remembering, however, requires continuity. When continuity breaks, memory fragments. This may explain why many ancient technologies appear independently in multiple regions. Fire management, stone napping, basic shelter forms recur because they are rediscovered, not transmitted intact. Rediscovery feels like invention. But invention without lineage lacks refinement. It takes generations to polish technique. Bottlenecks interrupt this polishing. Progress resets partially, never fully. Thus, the idea of linear advancement becomes misleading. Humanity moves forward, but along uneven paths, looping and doubling back. The Ice Age extinction may represent the deepest loop. In genetic terms, bottlenecks amplify certain traits by chance. In cultural terms, they amplify certain values. Traits favoring cooperation, risk-sharing, and social cohesion likely increased simply because isolated individuals could not survive. This does not mean altruism emerged as moral principle. It emerged as consequence. Groups that shared food survived longer. Groups that pooled warmth endured colder nights. Groups that coordinated movement avoided overexploitation. Coordination requires trust. Trust becomes precious when replacement options vanish. In sparse populations, betrayal is costly. Reputation matters. Memory of behavior persists because encounters repeat. This environment favors consistency over novelty, yet novelty is required to adapt. Thus, post-bottleneck societies face a tension: stability through trust versus flexibility through experimentation. Too much trust without experimentation leads to stagnation. Too much experimentation without trust leads to fragmentation. The balance is delicate. Perhaps this is why early myths often contain trickster figures alongside elders. The trickster disrupts patterns. The elder preserves them. Both are necessary. Without disruption, systems ossify. Without preservation, they dissolve. The Ice Age survivors may have encoded this balance symbolically because it could not be articulated structurally. Symbols carry contradictions more easily than rules. As populations increased, these symbolic systems diversified. Myths branched. Rituals specialized. Local environments shaped expression. But beneath diversity, similar tensions recur. Fear of overreach, reverence for limits, suspicion of abundance. These themes appear in myths long before agriculture intensifies them. This suggests they are older than farming, older than settlement. They may originate in the bottleneck itself. When abundance collapses abruptly, caution becomes wisdom. When caution persists too long, it becomes inhibition. The memory of collapse must be softened to allow growth. Thus, stories evolve. Catastrophes become divine punishments or moral lessons rather than environmental events. This reframing allows distance. Distance reduces fear. Reduced fear enables expansion, but it also weakens preparedness. Here lies the paradox. Survival requires forgetting just enough to move forward, but remembering enough to avoid repetition. Human history oscillates within this paradox. The Ice Age extinction anchors the first oscillation. Later collapses echo it on smaller scales. The Bronze Age collapse, the fall of Rome, the abandonment of major urban centers in the Americas. Each involves sudden contraction, loss of complexity, and reorganization. In each case, survivors inherit fragments rather than wholes. They rebuild with partial memory. The pattern repeats. What distinguishes the Ice Age event is its scale and depth. It stripped humanity to a thin thread. From that thread, everything else unfurled. This origin carries implications. If most humans alive today descend from a very small population, then shared psychological traits may reflect that shared trauma. Trauma does not always manifest as fear. It can appear as drive, a drive to expand, to secure, to dominate uncertainty. This drive may fuel innovation and exploitation simultaneously. The desire to prevent vulnerability can lead to overcompensation. Walls become higher, systems more complex, extraction intensifies. Each layer adds control but also fragility. Fragility emerges when systems grow dependent on assumptions of stability. The Ice Age bottleneck contradicts stability. It teaches that conditions can flip beyond recovery. This lesson, buried beneath layers of progress, still exerts pressure. Modern humans build redundancies unconsciously. Backup systems, insurance, stockpiles, digital archives. These behaviors mirror ancient hoarding instincts shaped by scarcity. Yet redundancy without restraint can accelerate depletion. Stockpiles become targets. Excess attracts competition. Again, balance is required. Balance depends on accurate risk perception. Risk perception depends on memory. Memory fades. Thus, cycles repeat. One might ask why humanity does not learn permanently. The answer may lie in generational turnover. Those who experience collapse directly carry vivid memory. Their descendants inherit diluted versions. By the third or fourth generation, memory becomes myth or policy. Policy lacks visceral force. Without visceral force, urgency wanes. Then exposure returns. This rhythm appears consistent across cultures and eras. The Ice Age extinction sets the template but not the timetable. What is new is the compression of time. Technological acceleration reduces generational distance. Decisions propagate faster than biological adaptation. This creates mismatch. Bodies and instincts calibrated for slow change confront rapid transformation. Stress accumulates. Accumulated stress erodes judgment. Judgment falters at thresholds. Thresholds approach silently. The Ice Age survivors did not know they were at a threshold until it passed. Modern humanity has indicators but debates their interpretation. Debate itself consumes time. Time may be the scarcest resource in nonlinear systems. Silence in ancient records may reflect this. Events move too quickly for interpretation. Perhaps silence is not absence but speed. When change outpaces meaning, narration fails. The past becomes blur. This blur challenges historians, but it also challenges planners. How does one prepare for events that cannot be fully described? The Ice Age extinction suggests preparation lies not in prediction, but in adaptability. Adaptability requires diversity, redundancy, and humility. Diversity of strategies, redundancy of support, humility before uncertainty. These qualities are not optimized by maximum efficiency. Efficiency trims buffers. Buffers absorb shock. The ancient bottleneck rewarded buffers, not speed. But speed eventually overtook buffers. Now speed dominates again. The question is whether buffers can be restored intentionally or only after loss forces them back. Loss teaches harshly. The survivors of the Ice Age extinction learned through necessity. Modern humanity has the option to learn through attention instead. Attention to what is quiet. Attention to patterns repeating. Attention to unease without immediate cause. Unease may be memory surfacing, not memory of events, but of conditions. The body remembers vulnerability even when the mind forgets. Listening to that memory may be uncomfortable, but ignoring it may be more costly. The ancient bottleneck does not demand reverence. It demands recognition. Recognition that humanity has faced near erasure before. Recognition that survival came not from dominance, but from responsiveness. Whether this recognition arrives in time remains uncertain. The next threshold will not announce itself. It will arrive as the last one did, quietly, unevenly, and faster than expected. And only afterward will its name become clear. If adaptability carried the survivors forward, then the next mystery is how adaptability hardened into structure without erasing its own origins. Somewhere after the Great Thinning, flexibility began to congeal. Patterns repeated long enough to be trusted. Temporary shelters became seasonal returns. Seasonal returns became claims. Claims over time became attachment. Attachment is not settlement yet, it is expectation. Expectation changes behavior subtly. A group that expects to return prepares differently than one that wanders without anchor. Tools are cached, pathways are cleared, knowledge becomes place-bound. Memory starts to cling to geography. This shift appears faintly in the archaeological record, almost reluctant. Hearths reused after long gaps, middens accumulating slowly, animal bones clustered by season rather than scattered randomly. These traces suggest patience, not permanence. Patience may have been the first luxury regained after the Ice Age, but patience carries risk. To wait is to assume stability. Stability had betrayed humanity before. Why then did survivors risk it again? Perhaps because numbers had recovered just enough to allow experimentation without total collapse. Or perhaps because the climate itself entered a brief phase of relative calm, offering an illusion of reliability. The younger Dryas would later shatter that illusion, but before it did, something shifted. During this window, humans began to notice rhythms extending beyond immediate survival. Not just weather cycles, but animal migrations aligning predictably. Plant regrowth following familiar timelines. The land began to speak in intervals rather than surprises. Intervals invite planning. Planning invites accumulation. Accumulation invites inequality. These transitions did not arrive together. They layered slowly, unevenly, and differently across regions. Some groups leaned into planning, others resisted it. Both strategies could work until conditions changed. This divergence may explain why early post-glacial societies appear so varied despite shared ancestry. The bottleneck unified genetics, but environment diversified outcomes. In fertile corridors, patience paid off. In marginal zones, mobility remained essential. Neither path was superior universally. What mattered was responsiveness. Yet responsiveness becomes harder as systems grow. A mobile band can pivot overnight. A semi-sedentary group cannot. Cached resources anchor behavior. Investments. Bias decisions. Thus, success breeds rigidity. Rigidity increases vulnerability. The Ice Age survivors had learned vulnerability deeply, but learning decays when conditions stabilize. This decay may underlie the recurring pattern of overcommitment followed by correction. Correction often arrives as climate disruption. The younger Dryas stands as an early reminder. Just as post-glacial warming seemed secure, temperatures plunged abruptly. Ecosystems shifted again. Established patterns failed. Human responses varied. Some groups abandoned nascent settlements and returned to mobility. Others doubled down, intensifying control over resources. Both responses appear archaeologically. This divergence hints at a deeper split in human strategy that persists today. One path prioritizes flexibility, the other prioritizes control. Control promises predictability. Flexibility accepts uncertainty. Control scales well in stable conditions. Flexibility survives volatility. The Ice Age extinction had favored flexibility. The post-glacial world tempted control. Temptation grew stronger as memory of collapse faded. By the time agriculture emerged independently in multiple regions, the choice had been partially made. Agriculture is often framed as progress, but from another angle, it is a wager. It assumes climate stability sufficient to support long-term cultivation. It assumes protection from large-scale disruption. This assumption had failed before, yet it was embraced again. Why? Possibly because population density crossed a threshold where mobility no longer sustained everyone, or because accumulated knowledge reduced perceived risk, or because social structures had already shifted toward ownership and inheritance. Once inheritance matters, movement becomes costly. Children tie adults to place. Stores tie families to fields. Fields tie groups to seasons. The body learns to endure monotony. Monotony dulls sensitivity. Sensitivity had once been survival's ally. Its dulling may be the hidden cost of agriculture. This cost manifests psychologically. Repetition replaces variation. Control replaces attentiveness. Rules replace improvisation. In exchange, yields increase. Surplus emerges. Surplus allows specialization. Specialization enables complexity. Complexity demands coordination. Coordination requires authority. Authority abstracts decision-making away from sensation. The further decisions move from bodily feedback, the more brittle systems become. This brittleness is not immediate. It accumulates invisibly. Early agricultural societies flourish for generations before collapsing abruptly. The pattern recurs globally. Collapse is often attributed to invasion, disease, or environmental stress. These factors matter, but beneath them lies rigidity. Rigidity resists adjustment. The Ice Age survivors thrived because they adjusted constantly. Their descendants thrived by stabilizing adjustment. Stabilization carries an expiration date. This expiration date is rarely known in advance. Thus, civilizations appear confident until suddenly they are not. The silence in historical records around collapses may reflect shock rather than ignorance. When systems unravel faster than narration, memory fragments, survivors piece together meaning afterward. Those meanings shape the next cycle. Often they emphasize moral failure rather than structural mismatch. Moral narratives simplify complexity. They also misdirect attention. Attention should perhaps rest on responsiveness rather than righteousness. The Ice Age extinction teaches this quietly. It was not punishment, it was mismatch. Climate shifted beyond tolerance. Populations exceeded resilience. Systems broke. Survivors were those who sensed change early and moved accordingly. This pattern persists. In modern contexts, sensing change early requires listening to weak signals rather than dominant narratives. Weak signals often appear as discomfort, anomalies, unease. These are easy to dismiss. They are dismissed repeatedly until dismissal fails. Then attention arrives too late. The challenge is recognizing when stability becomes trap. The post-glacial shift from flexibility to control was gradual. It felt like progress. Only later did its costs become apparent. Perhaps humanity has been oscillating between these modes ever since, unable to settle permanently into either. Flexibility alone cannot support large populations. Control alone cannot survive volatility. The Ice Age bottleneck forced extreme flexibility. The agricultural revolution forced extreme control. The tension between these extremes defines history. Modernity pushes control further than ever before. Predictive models, centralized systems, global supply chains all extend the logic of control. They work impressively until they don't. When they fail, failures propagate widely. Flexibility has been externalized, outsourced to technology rather than embodied in behavior. This may be a vulnerability. Technology can amplify response, but only if signals are interpreted correctly. If signals are filtered or delayed, amplification worsens impact. Thus, the question is not whether humanity will face another bottleneck, but how prepared it is to recognize approach. Recognition requires humility. Humility before uncertainty. Humility before limits. The Ice Age survivors did not romanticize their condition. They endured it. Their endurance was not heroic, it was attentive. Attention is not dramatic. It is quiet, sustained, and often uncomfortable. Modern systems discourage discomfort. Discomfort threatens consumption. Consumption fuels growth. Growth justifies control. Control masks fragility. The loop closes. Breaking the loop requires interrupting assumptions. The assumption that stability can be engineered indefinitely. The assumption that efficiency is always beneficial. The assumption that memory resides only in data. The Ice Age extinction challenges these assumptions without speaking. Its lesson is implicit. Survival favors those who treat the world as dynamic, not predictable. This does not mean abandoning planning, it means planning for disruption. It means valuing adaptability as much as optimization. Whether modern societies can do this voluntarily remains open. History suggests adjustment often follows collapse, not foresight. Yet foresight exists. It exists in bodies, instincts, unease. The fur-free humans who survived once trusted these signals. Their descendants may need to learn how again. The next part of the story moves closer to that question. How the memory of collapse becomes encoded not only in myth and habit but in the nervous system itself, and how that encoding shapes behavior long after the original threat is gone. For now the pattern holds. Stability invites structure. Structure invites rigidity. Rigidity invites collapse. And collapse, when survived, invites adaptation once more. The cycle waits patiently. It always has. If collapse repeats, then something must carry its memory forward even when records vanish. Not instructions, not dates, not diagrams, but tendencies. Ways of reacting that appear before reasoning. Reflexes that surface when pressure rises. These do not need language to persist. The survivors of the Ice Age did not pass down manuals. They passed down nervous systems shaped by constraint. Long after glaciers retreated, long after megafauna vanished, human behavior continued to display patterns that seem excessive unless viewed through the lens of remembered scarcity. Hoarding beyond immediate need. Anxiety around cold, darkness, isolation. A tendency to gather around heat and light. These behaviors appear universal, cutting across cultures that never contacted one another. Such universality suggests inheritance deeper than story. Modern biology hesitates here carefully. Genetics explains structure, not memory. Yet epigenetics complicates the boundary. Stress, famine, and extreme environmental pressure can alter gene expression in ways that persist across generations. Not memories, but sensitivities. Sensitivity is enough. A body more reactive to scarcity does not need to remember the Ice Age to behave as if it might return. This possibility unsettles neat narratives of progress. It implies that human psychology is not simply shaped by recent experience but haunted by distant survival thresholds. The archaeological record supports this uneasily. After the Ice Age, even in regions where resources were abundant, humans often behaved as if abundance might vanish tomorrow. They stored, they ritualized sharing, they marked territory defensively. They reacted sharply to perceived threats. These responses may have prevented future extinctions. They may also have seeded conflict. A species shaped by near erasure does not relax easily. This may explain the paradox of early societies that appear both cooperative and violent. Cooperation ensured survival. Violence protected access to survival. The same sensitivity fueled both. As time passed and conditions stabilized, these inherited responses did not disappear. They adapted to new contexts. Fear of starvation transformed into fear of loss. Fear of exposure transformed into fear of exclusion. The nervous system retained its vigilance even as threats became abstract. Civilization layered symbolism over this vigilance. Property replaced territory. Currency replaced stored food. Status replaced access to warmth and protection. Yet the underlying responses remained bodily. Loss still triggered panic disproportionate to immediate danger. Accumulation still produced temporary relief rather than satisfaction. Control still felt safer than trust. These are not moral failures, they are echoes of a time when miscalculation meant extinction. The danger lies not in having these responses, but in forgetting their origin. When inherited vigilance is mistaken for rational assessment, societies may overreact to imagined threats and underreact to real ones. This misalignment appears repeatedly in history. Empires collapse not only from external pressure, but from internal paranoia. Resources are diverted toward control rather than adaptation. Dissent is treated as danger rather than signal. Feedback loops close. The Ice Age survivors relied on feedback. Their descendants often silence it. Why silence emerges is understandable. Feedback is uncomfortable. It disrupts certainty. It demands change. Change threatens established power. Thus, systems evolve to dampen signals rather than interpret them. When dampening succeeds temporarily, it is mistaken for resilience. True resilience looks different. It tolerates discomfort early to avoid catastrophe later. This distinction is subtle and easily lost. The nervous system evolved to detect early warning signs: elevated heart rate, unease, restlessness. In modern contexts, these are often medicated, distracted, or reframed as individual dysfunction. This may be necessary for functioning within rigid systems. It may also obscure collective danger. The Ice Age extinction did not announce itself dramatically at first. It unfolded through small changes: cooler seasons, shifting prey patterns, longer lean periods. Those who noticed early survived. Those who waited for certainty did not. This lesson does not scale easily. Large populations demand coordination. Coordination demands shared narratives. Shared narratives simplify complexity. Simplification delays response. Thus, scale itself becomes a risk factor. The bottleneck reduced scale dramatically. It reset humanity to a size where responsiveness was possible. As populations grew, responsiveness diluted. This may explain why collapse cycles shorten as societies grow more complex. Feedback delays increase. Technology accelerates both detection and distraction. Information overload masks signal within noise. The challenge becomes discernment rather than awareness. Discernment requires trust in sensation as well as data. But sensation is subjective. It resists centralization. Institutions prefer quantifiable indicators, yet some of the most important signals resist quantification. Unease before explanation, fatigue before diagnosis, discomfort before disaster. These signals originate in the same systems that once guided Ice Age survival. To ignore them entirely is to sever connection with evolutionary memory. To obey them blindly is equally dangerous. Balance is required. Balance, however, is difficult to institutionalize. It emerges more readily in small groups with shared accountability. Large systems struggle with it. This tension may be unsolvable at global scale, which raises an uncomfortable possibility that humanity's evolutionary success has outpaced its capacity for stable organization. The bottleneck once solved this by force. Whether a similar reset would be survivable now is uncertain. What is certain is that the memory of past resets lingers. It surfaces in myths of floods, fires, and darkness. It surfaces in apocalyptic imagination. It surfaces in cyclical philosophies rather than linear ones. Cultures across the world independently conceived of ages, cycles, renewals. These ideas are often dismissed as metaphorical. They may also be mnemonic, not memories of events but of vulnerability. A reminder that continuity is conditional. The Ice Age extinction taught that lesson once decisively. Its survivors carried it forward implicitly. As time passed, the lesson blurred into anxiety, ritual, and law. The original clarity faded, yet under pressure clarity can return. Crises strip away abstraction. They recenter attention on essentials: warmth, food, shelter, cooperation. During disasters, modern humans often behave in ways that surprise observers. They share, they improvise, they adapt rapidly. These behaviors appear suddenly, then recede as systems reassert control. This suggests that the capacity for flexibility remains intact, dormant beneath layers of habit. The bottleneck did not erase this capacity. It sharpened it. The question is whether humanity can access it intentionally without catastrophe. History offers few examples, yet the present moment differs in one crucial way. Awareness of past bottlenecks exists. Knowledge does not guarantee wisdom, but it creates possibility. The story of the Ice Age extinction is no longer silent. It is studied, modeled, debated. Still, its implications are often framed narrowly as a lesson in climate vulnerability or genetic survival. Its deeper lesson concerns behavior. Survival favored those who responded to change before it became undeniable. Those responses were not heroic. They were adaptive. Adaptation is quiet. It does not announce itself. It requires attention. Attention is scarce. The future may hinge on where attention is placed, on growth metrics or on weak signals, on comfort or on resilience, on control or on responsiveness. These are not mutually exclusive choices, but priorities. The Ice Age survivors prioritized responsiveness because they had no alternative. Their descendants now have alternatives. Whether those alternatives prove durable remains unknown. The next layer of the story turns inward, toward cognition itself. How does a species shaped by repeated near-extinction think about time, risk, and certainty? And how might those cognitive patterns shape decisions now, when the scale of consequence exceeds anything previously faced? The answers may not be found in archives. They may be found in hesitation, in discomfort, in the quiet sense that something familiar is returning, even if its shape is not yet clear. If survival shaped the nervous system before it shaped belief, then cognition itself carries traces of the bottleneck. Not memories of events, but preferences for certain kinds of thinking, ways of organizing uncertainty, ways of responding to incomplete information. The Ice Age survivors did not have the luxury of long deliberation. Conditions shifted faster than certainty could be established. Those who waited for proof risked dying with accurate models. Those who acted on partial signals lived, even if their explanations were wrong. This asymmetry leaves a mark. Human cognition appears biased toward false positives when danger is possible. It is safer to assume threat and be wrong than to dismiss threat and be erased. Evolution rewards caution when stakes are existential. This bias persists. Modern psychology identifies it as negativity bias, loss aversion, threat sensitivity. These are often treated as flaws to be corrected. They may instead be inheritances that once ensured survival. The problem arises when inherited caution operates in environments where threats are abstract, delayed, or mediated. The same systems that once detected climate shifts now scan social information. They interpret uncertainty as danger even when evidence is ambiguous. This can produce paranoia. Paranoia at scale destabilizes societies, yet the alternative, complete trust in stability, has historically been lethal. Thus, cognition oscillates between vigilance and denial. Denial often emerges when vigilance becomes exhausting. The Ice Age likely imposed chronic stress. Long periods of scarcity followed by brief reprieves. Stress hormones elevated over generations. Adaptation occurred. Those adaptations may have favored individuals who could function under prolonged uncertainty. This has implications for how humans relate to time. Short-term planning dominates. Immediate reward is prioritized. Long-term abstraction competes with survival instincts. Civilization demands long-term thinking. Agriculture requires patience. Infrastructure requires foresight. Institutions rely on delayed gratification. These demands push against inherited tendencies. To compensate, cultures develop external scaffolding, calendars, contracts, moral codes. These structures extend cognition beyond its evolved limits. They work until they fail. Failure often coincides with moments when abstract plans detach from lived reality, when models override sensation, when projections override feedback. The Ice Age extinction did not follow projections. It followed thresholds. Thresholds are difficult to model because they are non-linear. Small changes accumulate quietly, then cascade. The human nervous system is tuned to notice accumulation, not predict collapse. This tuning is imperfect but adaptive. Modern systems prioritize prediction over detection. They forecast future states but may ignore present signals. This inversion is subtle but consequential. The Ice Age survivors responded to what they felt and observed, not to what they calculated. Calculation came later. As abstraction increased, so did distance from immediate cues. This distance created power but also fragility. Fragility emerges when systems depend on assumptions of continuity. Continuity was rare in prehistory. Discontinuity was expected. This expectation shaped cognition. Even now, humans remain sensitive to disruption. Markets react disproportionately to uncertainty. Populations respond emotionally to perceived instability. Narratives of collapse gain traction quickly. These reactions are often criticized as irrational. They may be echoes of ancient calibration that kept a small population alive under extreme pressure. The problem is not that humans anticipate collapse. The problem is that they struggle to differentiate between signal and noise. Noise overwhelms modern environments. Continuous information streams saturate attention. The nervous system evolved to process limited inputs from immediate surroundings. It now processes global abstractions. This overload can trigger maladaptive responses, panic, withdrawal, aggression. Yet the capacity for adaptation remains. It emerges when information simplifies. During crises, people often report clarity. Focus narrows, priorities realign. This clarity resembles ancestral cognition. The noise recedes, the essential becomes obvious. This suggests that under the right conditions, inherited survival cognition activates effectively. The challenge is recreating those conditions without catastrophe. Some societies attempt this through ritual simplification, periodic fasting, retreats, silence, controlled hardship. These practices are often framed spiritually. They may also serve cognitive recalibration. By reducing inputs, they restore signal salience. They remind participants what matters. This is not nostalgia. It is maintenance. Maintenance of systems evolved for environments that no longer exist. As technology accelerates, maintenance becomes more critical. Acceleration increases mismatch between environment and biology. Mismatch generates stress. Stress drives behavior. Unmanaged stress produces instability. The Ice Age bottleneck was a stress test humanity barely passed. Its cognitive consequences persist. Understanding these consequences reframes contemporary dilemmas. Debates about growth, sustainability, and risk are not merely economic or political. They are cognitive. They involve inherited tendencies colliding with unprecedented scale. Scale magnifies error. Small misjudgments become systemic failures. This makes discernment vital. Discernment requires integrating data with sensation. Neither alone is sufficient. The Ice Age survivors relied primarily on sensation. Modern humans rely heavily on data. Integration remains incomplete. Education often prioritizes abstraction over embodiment. Children learn symbols before systems. They learn numbers before ecology. They learn narratives before feedback. This may delay development of intuitive understanding. Intuition is not mystical. It is pattern recognition shaped by exposure. Without exposure, intuition weakens. Virtual environments reduce exposure to consequence. Simulations allow experimentation without cost. This can be useful. It can also erode learning. Learning requires stakes. Stakes require risk. Risk requires vulnerability. The fur-free body once embodied vulnerability constantly. Modern insulation reduces it. The mind adapts accordingly. The question is whether vulnerability can be reintroduced safely. Some fields attempt this through controlled environments, fieldwork, apprenticeships, physical training. These experiences often produce profound shifts in perspective. Participants report heightened awareness, humility, connection. These are cognitive states aligned with survival cognition. They are difficult to sustain in modern contexts, yet they point toward possibility. Possibility of designing systems that maintain sensitivity without constant threat. This design challenge is central to the future. Ignoring evolutionary cognition risks repeating collapse patterns. Overriding it risks chaos. Listening to it requires courage. Courage to tolerate discomfort, to question certainty, to act before proof. These qualities are often discouraged in bureaucratic systems. They resist standardization, yet they may be essential. The Ice Age extinction filtered humanity through a narrow gate. Those who emerged carried tendencies that favored responsiveness over control. Civilization inverted that preference. Now the costs of inversion accumulate. Climate instability, resource depletion, social fragmentation. These pressures resemble early warning signs. The nervous system responds. Anxiety rises. Polarization intensifies. These responses can be misdirected. They can also be informative. The task is interpretation. Interpretation requires slowing down, listening, differentiating ancestral alarm from present threat. This is difficult. There are no manuals, only practice. Practice in paying attention to weak signals. Practice in adjusting behavior incrementally. Practice in accepting uncertainty. The Ice Age survivors practice this unconsciously. Modern humans must practice it deliberately. Whether this is possible at scale remains unknown. History suggests limits, but history also reveals adaptation under pressure. The next layer of the story concerns myth and narrative. How did a species, shaped by Bottleneck, encode its fears and lessons into stories? And how might those stories continue to shape perception long after their original context faded? To answer that, attention must shift from bones and climate models to symbols and memory. Not because symbols replace reality, but because they preserve traces of it, traces that may still guide behavior if recognized. When direct memory fades, what remains is pattern. The Ice Age survivors could not preserve records of extinction and survival in any durable form. There was no writing, no archive, no fixed chronology. What endured instead were stories shaped to be remembered, not for accuracy, but for usefulness. Myth emerges here not as fantasy but as compression, a compressed record of lived experience. Across cultures separated by oceans and millennia, certain motifs recur with unsettling consistency. Floods that erase worlds, fires that fall from the sky, long winters without end, suns that weaken or disappear, small groups of survivors who begin again from remnants. These stories are often dismissed as metaphor or as imaginative attempts to explain natural phenomena. Yet their persistence suggests something deeper, not coincidence but resonance. Myths may encode experiences too large, too traumatic or too complex to be transmitted directly. They transform fear into narrative, chaos into structure. In this sense, myth is not false history. It is embodied memory translated into symbolic language. Consider the widespread presence of flood myths. From Mesopotamia to the Americas, stories describe catastrophic inundations that wipe out civilizations, sparing only a few. Geological evidence confirms that rapid sea level rise occurred at the end of the last ice age. Meltwater pulses reshaped coastlines abruptly. For populations living near rivers and shores, these events would have been devastating. But flood myths often include moral dimensions, warnings about hubris, disorder, or forgotten laws. These elements may reflect attempts to impose meaning on loss rather than literal causation. Meaning stabilizes trauma. It allows communities to continue. Similarly, myths of fire or sky destruction appear in cultures that experienced volcanic eruptions, meteor impacts, or widespread wildfires. These events imprint themselves viscerally. The sensory overload, heat, darkness, sound, exceeds ordinary experience. The nervous system struggles to integrate such events. Narrative assists. By framing catastrophe as intentional or cyclical, myth restores predictability. Predictability reduces fear, yet predictability can also distort. When symbols harden into doctrine, flexibility diminishes. This tension plays out repeatedly. Early myths were fluid, adapted through retelling. They responded to context. Over time, as societies stabilized, myths fossilized. They became sacred. Sacred narratives resist revision. This resistance preserves identity but risks misalignment with reality. The Ice Age survivors likely relied on adaptive myths, stories that changed as conditions changed. As civilizations grew, adaptation slowed. Fixed myths offered stability, but stability can become rigidity. Rigid narratives may fail when conditions shift rapidly. History records moments when sacred explanations could not accommodate new evidence. These moments often trigger crisis. The transition from oral to written culture amplified this effect. Writing preserves narratives with fidelity. Fidelity favors continuity over responsiveness. Written myths endure unchanged long after their context vanishes. They become disconnected from the experiences that birthed them. This disconnection can produce misinterpretation. Symbols once tied to survival become abstract moral rules. Rules applied without understanding. This pattern may explain why certain ancient injunctions seem arbitrary or harsh when removed from environmental context. They were responses to specific conditions, conditions that no longer exist. Yet the injunctions persist. This persistence shapes behavior, sometimes beneficially, sometimes destructively. The Ice Age bottleneck likely intensified the need for shared meaning. Small populations require cohesion. Cohesion requires narrative. Narrative binds. It defines in-groups and out-groups. It explains suffering. It justifies sacrifice. These functions were adaptive, but they also laid groundwork for exclusion. As populations expanded, myths scaled. They justified hierarchies. They explained inequality. They sanctioned authority. What began as survival memory became social control. This transformation complicates interpretation. Myths carry both wisdom and distortion. Disentangling them requires caution. Modern analysis often swings between extremes, either dismissing myth entirely or treating it as literal truth. Both approaches miss nuance. Myth operates at a different level. It encodes relationships between humans and environment, between action and consequence. These relationships may remain valid even if the narrative details are symbolic. For example, myths' warning of cycles of destruction may reflect recognition of environmental thresholds. Ignoring thresholds invites catastrophe. The specific imagery, floods, fire, darkness, may vary. The lesson remains. Modern science describes similar dynamics using different language. Climate tipping points, ecosystem collapse, feedback loops. The vocabulary changes, but the structure aligns. This alignment suggests continuity of understanding, not of facts but of patterns. The Ice Age survivors did not know atmospheric chemistry. They knew instability. They knew abrupt change. They knew fragility. Their stories reflect that knowledge. As millennia passed, those stories traveled farther than the experiences they referenced. They became detached, reinterpreted, sometimes weaponized, yet their core persists. Even secular cultures retain apocalyptic narratives. They appear in fiction, cinema, political rhetoric. They capture attention. They provoke anxiety. They motivate action. This suggests that the underlying cognitive architecture remains sensitive to collapse scenarios. The Ice Age bottleneck may have permanently sensitized humanity to existential risk. This sensitivity can motivate precaution. It can also paralyze. Paralysis emerges when threat is perceived as unavoidable. Ancient myths often included renewal after destruction. A remnant survives. A new world begins. This element is crucial. It preserves hope. Hope sustains effort. Without hope, adaptation ceases. The balance between warning and hope is delicate. Too much warning produces despair. Too much hope produces complacency. Effective myth navigates between. Modern narratives often skew either toward catastrophe without agency or progress without limits. Both extremes undermine resilience. Resilience depends on realistic appraisal combined with belief in action. The Ice Age survivors acted because action mattered. They had no guarantees, only choices. Their stories reflect this uncertainty. Modern retellings often remove agency. They portray survivors as chosen or catastrophe as divine decree. This removes responsibility. Responsibility is heavy, but without it, adaptation falters. Understanding myth as adaptive memory restores responsibility. It reframes stories as guidance, not fate. This reframing requires humility. It requires accepting that ancient knowledge may be encoded differently, not inferior. It also requires acknowledging that some myths may mislead when conditions change. Discernment becomes essential. Discernment involves comparing narrative with evidence, symbolism with context. This is challenging. It demands interdisciplinary thinking, archaeology, geology, anthropology, psychology. No single field suffices. The Ice Age extinction story spans domains. Its echoes appear in sediment layers and neural circuits, in climate proxies and cultural symbols. Ignoring any layer produces incomplete understanding. Part of the difficulty lies in modern fragmentation of knowledge. Specialization narrows focus. Integration becomes rare. Myth once integrated domains intuitively. Modern science dissects. Both approaches have strengths. Integration must be rebuilt deliberately. This rebuilding is slow. It resists institutional inertia. Yet some movements attempt it. Environmental humanities, cognitive archaeology, comparative mythology informed by climate science. These efforts suggest renewed interest in synthesis, perhaps driven by contemporary instability. When systems strain, synthesis becomes necessary. The Ice Age survivors synthesized continuously. Their lives depended on it. Modern humans may need to relearn this skill, not by abandoning rigor but by expanding perspective, by recognizing that truth can appear in different forms. That data and story serve complementary roles. That meaning matters alongside measurement. The next layer of the story examines how these ancient narratives influenced early civilizations. How did myth-informed cognition shape agriculture, settlement, and power structures? And how did the memory of extinction fade or resurface as societies grew confident in their permanence? The answers lie not only in ruins, but in the stories civilizations told themselves as they rose. Stories that may still whisper warnings, if listened to carefully. As societies stabilized and expanded, something subtle shifted. The memory of near extinction did not vanish, but it grew distant, diluted by success. Agriculture transformed landscapes into predictable systems. Seasonal cycles were mapped. Surpluses accumulated. For the first time since the Ice Age collapse, large populations could imagine continuity. Continuity breeds confidence. Confidence alters behavior. Early farming communities settled near rivers whose rhythms seemed dependable. Floods fertilized soil. Droughts were temporary. The land appeared manageable. This perception encouraged permanence. Villages became towns, towns became cities. Walls rose, storage pits deepened, calendars emerged. With these developments came a new relationship to uncertainty. Where hunter-gatherers adjusted constantly, agricultural societies planned. Planning reduced vulnerability to small fluctuations, but increased exposure to rare extremes. This trade-off was not obvious at first. It unfolded slowly. As populations grew denser, failure became more costly. A single bad harvest could ripple through thousands. Yet success reinforced belief in control. Control reshaped cosmology. Deities once associated with broad forces, storms, seasons, fertility, became specialized administrators. Gods governed rain schedules, harvest outcomes, and moral order. Rituals aimed to maintain stability. Stability became sacred. This sacralization of order carried consequences. When anomalies occurred, unexpected floods, prolonged droughts, they threatened not just food supply, but worldview. Explanations were required. Sometimes blame fell on moral transgression, sometimes on forgotten rights, rarely on systemic vulnerability. The memory of extinction had transformed into a moral lesson rather than a practical one. Instead of warning about environmental thresholds, myths warned about disobedience. This shift externalized causation. It reduced incentive to adapt structurally. Instead, adaptation focused on appeasement. Appeasement can be effective short-term. It builds cohesion, but it cannot alter climate. Archaeological records show cycles of expansion, followed by abrupt contraction. The Akkadian Empire collapsed during a prolonged drought. The Maya experienced repeated societal breakdowns coinciding with climate stress. Similar patterns appear across continents. In many cases, the collapse was sudden relative to the duration of stability. Systems optimized for normal conditions failed under extremes. This is a familiar pattern in complex systems. The Ice Age survivors had lived in a world of extremes. Their strategies emphasized flexibility over efficiency. Agricultural civilizations emphasized efficiency over flexibility. Efficiency supports growth. Flexibility supports survival. Balancing the two is difficult. As writing proliferated, administrative systems expanded. Records tracked harvests, labor, taxes. Information flowed upward. Decision-making centralized. Centralization accelerates coordination but slows response to novel threats. Signals from the periphery may be delayed, filtered, or ignored. This dynamic appears repeatedly in historical collapses. Warnings accumulate. Responses lag. By the time action occurs, thresholds are crossed. The survivors of the Ice Age bottleneck responded immediately to change because they felt it directly. Agricultural elites often felt insulated. Their environments were buffered. They inhabited stone buildings. They had access to stored food. They experienced anomalies later than farmers and herders. This temporal lag distorted perception. By the time elites recognized crisis, options were limited. This is not a moral failing. It is a structural one. As societies grew, layers multiplied between sensation and decision. Each layer reduced fidelity. The loss of fur had once increased sensitivity. Civilization rebuilt insulation. Social, architectural, bureaucratic. This insulation brought comfort. It also brought blindness. The mythic memory of extinction persisted, but its meaning shifted. Instead of prompting vigilance, it reinforced hierarchy. Chosen survivors became chosen rulers. Divine favor justified inequality. Those who suffered were deemed impure or expendable. This interpretation served power. It did not serve resilience. Yet even within rigid systems, cracks appeared. Subcultures preserved alternative knowledge. Pastoralists maintained mobility. Indigenous groups retained oral traditions emphasizing environmental reciprocity. These groups often survived longer during collapses, not because they were immune, but because they adapted faster. History tends to marginalize these narratives. They do not align with progress-focused frameworks. They challenge assumptions, but they carry lessons. For example, many indigenous myths emphasize cyclical destruction and renewal without moral condemnation. They frame collapse as natural, not punitive. This framing encourages acceptance and preparation, rather than denial. Preparation reduces shock. Shock amplifies damage. The distinction matters. Modern society often oscillates between denial and panic. Neither supports adaptation. Denial delays action. Panic leads to reactive measures that may worsen outcomes. The Ice Age survivors operated in a different mode. They expected instability. Expectation reduces panic. It also reduces complacency. Expectation of change shapes culture. It influences child-rearing, risk-taking, and cooperation. Agricultural civilizations taught stability. Modern industrial societies teach progress. Both minimize instability. Yet instability persists. The question is how to reintegrate expectation without surrendering achievement. This is not a call to abandon civilization. It is a call to recalibrate its assumptions. Understanding the Ice Age extinction as a formative trauma rather than a distant anomaly reframes history. It suggests that human cognition evolved under conditions of fragility, not abundance. Fragility shaped cooperation, foresight, and meaning-making. Abundance reshapes those traits, sometimes eroding them. The erosion is gradual. It often goes unnoticed until stress reveals it. This revelation can be devastating or transformative. Which outcome occurs depends on preparedness. Preparedness is not merely technological. It is psychological. It involves tolerance for uncertainty, willingness to revise narratives, capacity to listen to weak signals. The Ice Age survivors listened because their lives depended on it. Modern systems often dismiss weak signals as noise, yet noise accumulates. Climate data, biodiversity loss, epidemiological risk, these are signals. They are often abstracted into graphs. Graphs inform. They do not always motivate. Embodied experience motivates. This is why disasters often spur action more effectively than reports. But waiting for disaster is costly. The challenge lies in translating abstract signals into meaningful prompts. Myth once did this. Modern equivalents struggle. Perhaps new narratives are needed. Narratives grounded in evidence but capable of engaging emotion. Narratives that frame adaptation as continuity, not sacrifice. That recall ancestral resilience without romanticizing hardship. This balance is delicate. Too much nostalgia distorts. Too much technocracy alienates. The Ice Age extinction story offers a grounding perspective. It reminds humanity that survival was once improbable. That survival required cooperation and humility. That dominance was temporary. These reminders are uncomfortable. They undermine fantasies of permanence. But discomfort can be instructive. The next part of the journey examines the biological legacy of this bottleneck. Did surviving populations carry genetic or cognitive traits shaped by extreme selection? And how might these traits influence modern behavior, decision-making, and vulnerability? The answers may lie not only in fossils, but in the subtle patterns of human response to threat and uncertainty that persist today. If a population is reduced to a fraction of its former size, something invisible but profound occurs. The survivors do not merely carry memories of catastrophe, they carry altered probabilities within their bodies. Genetic diversity narrows. Traits once rare may become common, not because they are ideal, but because those who carried them endured when others did not. The Ice Age bottleneck was not a single moment. It stretched across generations of scarcity, cold, shifting ecologies, and unpredictable loss. Survival was uneven. Some groups vanished entirely, others persisted in isolated pockets, separated by ice, desert, or sea. Isolation matters. When small groups persist over long periods, selection becomes intense. Not only physical traits are shaped, but behavioral tendencies. Caution, cooperation, novelty-seeking, risk aversion. These are not abstract qualities. They influence survival directly. Those who overextended may not have returned. Those who hoarded may have been excluded. Those who adapted socially may have endured. Over time, patterns accumulate. Modern genetic studies reveal signs of ancient bottlenecks in human DNA. Reduced variability in certain regions suggests that, at various points, populations passed through narrow corridors of survival. These findings are not controversial. What remains debated is their implication. Genes associated with stress response, immune function, and metabolism show signs of strong selection. This makes sense. Cold environments favor efficient energy use. Pathogen exposure during migration favors adaptable immune systems. But beyond physiology, researchers have begun to explore behavioral genetics cautiously. Not because behavior is determined by genes alone, but because tendencies can be influenced by inherited predispositions interacting with environment. For example, heightened threat sensitivity may have been advantageous in unstable climates. Detecting danger early could mean survival. Over time, such sensitivity might become common. In modern environments, this same sensitivity may manifest as anxiety. This is not a flaw. It is a context mismatch. Similarly, strong social bonding tendencies would have been critical in small groups facing harsh conditions. Isolation could mean death. Cooperation meant warmth, protection, and shared knowledge. In modern societies where survival does not depend on constant cooperation, these tendencies can express as loneliness when social bonds weaken. Again, not pathology. Mismatch. There is also evidence suggesting that humans evolved exceptional cognitive flexibility during this period. Rapid environmental change favors learning, experimentation, and problem-solving. Groups that could revise strategies quickly would outlast those bound to tradition. Flexibility becomes a survival trait. In stable environments, however, excessive flexibility can feel like restlessness, a desire for novelty, difficulty settling. These traits are often framed negatively, but their origin may be adaptive. The Ice Age did not select for comfort. It selected for responsiveness. Responsiveness can feel unsettling when threats are absent. This may explain certain patterns in human behavior that persist across cultures. Cycles of exploration and settlement, periods of innovation followed by consolidation, restlessness followed by nostalgia. These are not purely cultural phenomena. They may echo ancient selection pressures. Importantly, not all populations experienced the Ice Age in the same way. Some regions remained relatively stable, Others underwent extreme fluctuation. Genetic evidence suggests that modern humans carry mixtures of these lineages. This mixture creates diversity in response styles. Some individuals lean toward caution, others toward exploration. Both have roots in survival. Tension between these tendencies shapes societies. When exploration dominates, expansion occurs. When caution dominates, preservation follows. Neither mode is superior. Both are incomplete alone. The danger arises when one suppresses the other entirely. History shows repeated cycles where expansion ignores caution, leading to overreach, followed by collapse that reasserts restraint. The Ice Age bottleneck may have embedded this oscillation deeply into human nature, not as fate but as tendency. Another legacy of extreme selection may lie in how humans perceive time. In unstable environments, long-term planning is risky. Immediate adaptation matters more, yet abandoning foresight entirely is dangerous. Survivors likely balanced short-term responsiveness with medium-term memory. They remembered patterns without assuming permanence. This balance may underpin the human capacity for myth. Myths encode lessons without specifying timelines. They warn without predicting dates. They transmit caution without paralysis. Modern societies often struggle with this mode of knowledge. Scientific models project futures with probabilities. They are precise but abstract. Myths are imprecise but motivating. Perhaps both are needed. The Ice Age survivors relied on embodied knowledge passed through story, ritual, and practice. These forms do not age well in written archives. They adapt. This adaptability may explain why many ancient stories survive across millennia, while precise details are lost. The stories persist because they remain useful. Usefulness ensures transmission. In contrast, exact data becomes obsolete. This does not diminish science. It highlights complementary roles. The genetic legacy of survival also includes trade-offs in health. Traits that conserve energy may predispose to metabolic disorders in environments of abundance. Immune systems tuned for diverse pathogens may overreact in sanitized settings. Again, mismatch. Modern medicine addresses symptoms. Understanding origins reframes interpretation. It invites compassion for oneself, for others. When viewed through this lens, many modern struggles appear less like failures and more like echoes. Echoes of a past where survival required constant vigilance, where certainty was rare, where adaptability was everything. This perspective challenges narratives of linear progress. Progress exists, but it is layered atop ancient foundations, foundations that do not disappear when ignored. They influence behavior subtly. They shape fear responses, trust thresholds, and cooperation dynamics. For instance, in times of perceived scarcity, humans often revert to tribal thinking. In-group cohesion strengthens. Out-group suspicion rises. This pattern appears repeatedly. It is often condemned, but it may reflect ancient survival logic reactivated under stress. Understanding this does not justify harm. It contextualizes reaction. Context allows intervention. If stress triggers ancient responses, reducing stress can alter behavior. This shifts focus from moralizing to mitigating, from blame to design. Designing systems that reduce perceived scarcity may dampen conflict. Designing communication that acknowledges uncertainty may build trust. Ignoring these dynamics invites repetition. The Ice Age bottleneck was not the last near-extinction event humanity faced, but it may have been the most formative. It shaped the species at a deep level. Subsequent crises played out on this template. Understanding the template does not predict outcomes. It informs possibilities. One such possibility is that modern humanity may be poorly adapted to sustain stability, not because stability is bad, but because it alters incentive structures. Extended stability can erode vigilance. It can normalize risk accumulation. This is observed in ecosystems as well. Systems stable for long periods accumulate hidden fragility. When disturbance returns, collapse is rapid. Resilient systems experience frequent small disturbances. They adapt continuously. The Ice Age survivors lived in a world of constant disturbance. Modern systems often aim to eliminate disturbance. The intention is understandable. The consequence may be vulnerability. Reintroducing manageable disturbance through simulation, training, decentralization may enhance resilience. This idea appears in various fields. Stress inoculation in psychology, fire management in ecology, redundancy in engineering. These principles echo ancient survival. They acknowledge that fragility grows in perfect order. Order must be tempered by flexibility. Flexibility was the gift of survival. The genetic and cognitive legacies of the Ice Age are not destiny. They are tendencies interacting with environment. Modern environments can amplify or soften them. The choice lies in design. Design of cities, design of institutions, design of narratives. Narratives that acknowledge fragility without fear, that honor adaptability without chaos, that integrate ancient sensitivity with modern knowledge. As this journey continues, another question emerges. If humanity carries within it the imprint of near extinction, how does this shape collective decision-making under global threat? And are current responses guided by deep survival wisdom or distorted by insulation that delays recognition until thresholds are crossed? The answer may not lie in data alone, but in how societies feel their way forward, balancing memory and imagination in uncertain times. When threats become global rather than local, ancient survival strategies encounter a problem they were never shaped to solve. The Ice Age taught humans how to endure scarcity in small groups, how to migrate, how to adapt rapidly when the landscape itself turned hostile. It did not teach how to coordinate billions of individuals across continents, bound together by invisible systems, acting on shared abstractions. This discrepancy matters. Modern danger rarely announces itself through immediate sensation. Rising atmospheric carbon does not burn the skin. Melting ice does not arrive with a sound. Economic instability does not smell like smoke. The signals are delayed, distributed, mediated by instruments and models rather than bodies. For a species whose deepest learning once came through felt consequence, this creates a cognitive gap. Ice Age humans responded to danger because danger was tangible. Hunger weakened the body. Cold stiffened the hands. Predators left tracks. Action followed perception closely. Delay meant death. Today, delay is normalized. The distance between cause and effect stretches across years, sometimes decades. By the time consequences arrive, the original actions are forgotten or disputed. Responsibility diffuses. This diffusion alters motivation. Evolution favored those who responded to immediate feedback. When feedback is abstract, response weakens. This is not ignorance. It is misalignment between evolved cognition and modern systems. Scientific warnings attempt to bridge this gap. Charts, projections, probabilities. These tools are precise, but they struggle to evoke urgency at a visceral level. The mind understands. The body remains calm, until it does not. Then reaction is abrupt. History shows this pattern repeatedly. Slow accumulation followed by sudden rupture. Financial crises, political revolutions, environmental collapses. The rupture feels surprising, but the conditions were visible long before. Visible, yet unfelt. This raises a troubling question. If the Ice Age selected for sensitivity to immediate consequence, has modern insulation dulled the very mechanism that once ensured survival? If so, how can societies restore responsiveness without inducing panic? One approach has been control. Regulations, enforcement, centralized planning. These methods impose action when voluntary response falters. They can be effective, but they generate resistance, especially when trust is low. Another approach is narrative. Stories that translate abstract danger into lived meaning, climate narratives that focus on personal impact, economic narratives that connect policy to daily life. Narrative can activate emotion where data cannot. This echoes ancient strategies. Myths encoded risk in memorable forms. Flood stories warned of water. Fire myths cautioned against excess. These narratives persisted because they engaged emotion. But modern narratives face fragmentation. Media ecosystems split attention. Competing stories cancel urgency. Trust erodes. Trust erosion itself may reflect ancient dynamics. In small groups, trust was maintained through direct observation. In large systems, trust depends on institutions. When institutions fail visibly, trust collapses quickly. Collapse triggers ancient responses. People retreat into smaller groups. They seek certainty. They simplify complexity. These behaviors are often criticized, but they are predictable. Predictability offers leverage. Understanding these patterns allows design of interventions that align with human nature rather than oppose it. For instance, decentralization can restore immediacy. Localized decision-making reconnects action with consequence. Community-scale projects allow feedback to be felt. Similarly, experiential education can complement abstract learning. Direct engagement with environments, gardening, restoration, hands-on science reawakens embodied understanding. These approaches do not replace global coordination. They support it by restoring the missing layer. Another lesson from the Ice Age lies in redundancy. Survivors did not rely on single strategies. They diversified food sources. They maintained multiple shelters. They preserved varied skills. Redundancy reduces catastrophic failure. Modern systems often optimize for efficiency, reducing redundancy. Supply chains minimize inventory. Infrastructure centralizes capacity. Efficiency increases vulnerability. Small disruptions cascade. This is not speculation. It has been observed repeatedly. Reintroducing redundancy appears wasteful in stable times. In unstable times, it is survival. Ancient humans accepted inefficiency as cost of resilience. They carried tools they might not use. They remembered routes they might not travel. They stored knowledge beyond immediate need. Modern societies often discard what is not immediately useful. This creates fragility. Fragility is invisible until tested. The Ice Age tested humanity continuously. Modern systems are tested intermittently. When tests occur, stakes are high. Another inherited tendency complicates matters: optimism bias. Humans consistently underestimate long-term risk. This bias may have been adaptive in uncertain environments. Excessive pessimism paralyzes action. Optimism encourages exploration. But in global systems, optimism can delay necessary restraint. Balancing optimism and realism is difficult. Ancient groups balanced this through elders and experience. Knowledge of past scarcity tempered enthusiasm. Stories of loss moderated risk-taking. In modern societies, generational memory fades quickly. Few living individuals remember systemic collapse. Institutions replace lived memory. When institutions themselves become unstable, memory gaps widen. This may explain cycles where warnings are ignored until disaster occurs, after which reforms are enacted only to erode as memory fades again. The Ice Age imprint includes this cycle. Understanding it offers an opportunity. Rather than expecting permanent vigilance, systems can be designed to function despite human forgetting. Automatic safeguards. Slow variables monitored continuously. Thresholds enforced independent of mood. This shifts burden from individual psychology to structural design. However, structures themselves require maintenance. Maintenance is undervalued. Ancient survival prioritized maintenance. Tools were repaired repeatedly. Shelters reinforced annually. Knowledge refreshed through ritual. Maintenance was survival. Modern culture often celebrates creation over care, innovation over preservation. This imbalance accelerates decay. Reframing maintenance as heroic rather than mundane may alter priorities. Again, narrative matters. There is also a deeper psychological layer. The Ice Age confronted humans with mortality constantly. Death was present, loss frequent. This shaped existential awareness. Modern societies often hide death. Hospitals, institutions, euphemisms. Mortality becomes abstract. Abstract mortality reduces urgency. When death is distant, consequences feel negotiable. When death is present, choices sharpen. This does not imply seeking suffering. It implies acknowledging limits. Acknowledgement fosters humility. Humility enables adaptation. Arrogance resists feedback. Feedback ignored becomes force. These dynamics scale. At the level of civilizations, arrogance manifests as assumption of control, belief that technology can override limits indefinitely. History repeatedly contradicts this belief. Each contradiction leaves ruins, yet each generation believes itself exempt. This belief may stem from insulation. When consequences are delayed, illusion persists. The Ice Age stripped illusion quickly. Survival was undeniable. Modern humanity may face a similar reckoning, though the form differs. The reckoning may arrive through climate instability, resource constraints, or systemic collapse, or it may be softened through anticipatory adaptation. The difference lies in responsiveness. Responsiveness requires sensitivity. Sensitivity was once ensured by exposed skin and direct engagement. Now it must be cultivated deliberately. Cultivation requires effort. Effort competes with convenience. Convenience has been a dominant value. Values can change. They have before. After crises, societies often shift priorities. Security replaces expansion. Cooperation replaces competition. The challenge is shifting before collapse. This is difficult because motivation often arises from felt pain. Can motivation arise from understanding alone? Perhaps partially. Perhaps not. The Ice Age legacy suggests that learning accelerates under pressure. Pressure does not have to be catastrophic. It can be simulated. Training exercises, stress tests, scenario planning. These methods attempt to introduce consequence without catastrophe. Their effectiveness depends on seriousness. When treated as formalities, they fail. When treated as real, they can save lives. This is true in aviation, medicine, engineering. It may apply socially. Another overlooked aspect of Ice Age survival is patience. Long winters taught waiting. Scarcity taught restraint. Not all problems could be solved immediately. Patience is difficult in fast-paced systems. Speed is rewarded. Speed without reflection leads to error. Slowing down is often resisted, yet strategic slowing can prevent disaster. Ancient groups understood pacing intuitively. They moved when conditions allowed. They waited when necessary. Modern systems often move continuously. Continuous movement can exhaust resources. Exhaustion reduces adaptability. Recognizing when to pause is critical. This requires trust that waiting will not be punished. Punitive environments discourage pause. Thus, economic and social incentives matter. If rest is penalized, burnout spreads. Burnout impairs judgment. Judgment failures accumulate. This chain is visible. Understanding it invites redesign. Redesign is uncomfortable. It threatens entrenched interests. Resistance is expected. Yet resistance itself may signal fragility. Resilient systems tolerate change. Fragile ones resist until collapse. The Ice Age survivors changed constantly. They had no choice. Modern humanity has choice. Choice creates responsibility. Responsibility requires awareness. Awareness requires listening to data, to stories, to bodies. Bodies still signal. Stress, fatigue, anxiety. These are not merely personal issues. They may be collective signals. Interpreting them solely as individual weakness misses systemic patterns. The question that emerges now is whether humanity can reinterpret its own discomfort as information rather than pathology, and whether listening to that information early enough can transform slow warning into timely adaptation before pressure escalates beyond control. If discomfort is information rather than error, then much of modern distress may be misread. Anxiety, fatigue, and a diffuse sense of unease are often treated as individual malfunctions, yet they arise with striking consistency across populations living under similar conditions. This uniformity suggests pattern, not anomaly. Patterns imply cause. Ice Age humans did not separate internal state from external condition. Hunger was not merely a feeling, it was a directive. Cold was not an inconvenience, it was a command to act or perish. Emotional states tracked environmental reality closely. Today, emotional signals often lack clear reference. Stress persists even when basic needs are met. Restlessness arises in comfortable rooms. Attention fractures without obvious threat. This mismatch may stem from sensory deprivation rather than overload. Modern environments reduce variation. Temperature stabilizes, light flattens, sound hums constantly, surfaces smooth, movement minimizes. The nervous system receives fewer meaningful cues, yet remains evolutionarily primed to respond. In the absence of clear signals, it generates its own. This may explain why anxiety often lacks object. The system searches for threat when threat is abstract or distant. Without resolution, tension remains. Resolution once came through action. Move camps, light fire, share food. The body responded and feedback followed. Now action is often symbolic. Clicking, scrolling, debating. The body does not receive closure. Closure requires consequence. This absence may also affect memory formation. Strong memories form when sensation, emotion, and action align. When experience is mediated, memory weakens. Time blurs. Many report that recent years feel indistinct. Days merge. Seasons lose texture. This subjective compression may reflect reduced sensory anchors. The Ice Age imprinted time through contrast. Extreme cold, brief warmth, hunger, abundance. Memory organized itself around change. Uniform comfort erases landmarks. Without landmarks, orientation suffers. Disorientation fuels dependence on external structure, schedules, notifications, directives. These tools provide order but deepen reliance. Reliance reduces agency. Agency once meant survival. Loss of agency creates vulnerability. This vulnerability invites control. Control promises stability. Stability delivered externally bypasses internal regulation. Internal regulation atrophies. Atrophy increases dependency. This cycle tightens. Breaking it requires reintroducing meaningful challenge. Challenge must be calibrated. Too little produces stagnation. Too much overwhelms. Ancient environments calibrated challenge naturally. Modern ones require design. Design choices shape behavior subtly. Urban planning, workplace norms, education systems. These can either suppress or support embodied engagement. For example, walkable environments restore movement and sensory feedback. Natural light exposure regulates circadian rhythm. Varied temperature encourages adaptation. These interventions are often justified economically or environmentally, but their psychological impact may be deeper. They restore dialogue between body and world. Dialogue reduces alienation. Alienation breeds extremism. Extremism simplifies complexity into certainty. Certainty without nuance leads to conflict. Conflict consumes resources. Resource loss exacerbates stress. Stress loops back. The Ice Age avoided such loops by default. Groups that failed to adapt dissolved quickly. Modern societies can persist longer despite misalignment, but persistence does not equal health. Health requires dynamic balance. Dynamic balance tolerates fluctuation. Static systems resist it. Resistance builds tension. Tension releases eventually. The form of release is unpredictable. Understanding this does not require belief in catastrophe. It requires respect for limits. Limits are biological constants. Ignoring them does not remove them. The body enforces limits regardless of ideology. Sleep deprivation impairs cognition. Chronic stress damages immunity. Isolation alters neurochemistry. These effects accumulate quietly. Institutions may mask them through productivity metrics, but underlying cost remains. When cost exceeds capacity, failure appears sudden. This suddenness creates narratives of shock. Shock obscures causality. Causality was present all along. Recognizing early signals requires literacy in bodily language. This literacy was once universal. Children learned by observing adults respond to environment. Knowledge transferred implicitly. Now much learning is abstract. Physical apprenticeship declines. Reintroducing apprenticeship in varied domains may restore embodied knowledge. This applies beyond trades. Emotional regulation, conflict resolution, cooperation, these are embodied skills. They cannot be fully taught through text. They require practice. Practice requires exposure. Exposure carries risk. Risk avoidance dominates policy. Risk avoidance may increase long-term risk. This paradox frustrates governance. Yet ancient societies navigated risk constantly. They accepted uncertainty as given. Modern culture often treats uncertainty as failure. This attitude intensifies anxiety. Reframing uncertainty as baseline may reduce distress. Acceptance does not mean passivity. It means readiness. Readiness arises from engagement. Engagement arises from presence. Presence is embodied. This chain loops back to skin. The skin remains the largest sensory organ. It detects temperature, pressure, vibration. These signals influence mood, attention, decision-making. When signals are muted, cognition detaches. Detached cognition spins narratives without anchor. Anchors are restored through sensation. This may explain the popularity of practices that emphasize bodily awareness. Yoga, meditation, breath work. These are not escapes but recalibrations. They slow the system. Slowing allows signal detection. Signal detection enables adjustment. Adjustment prevents breakdown. Viewed this way, ancient practices re-emerge not as nostalgia but as maintenance. Maintenance again. Modern culture undervalues maintenance because its benefits are invisible when successful. Failure makes maintenance visible retroactively. This misalignment of incentives persists. Changing it requires cultural shift. Cultural shifts follow crises or visionary leadership. Visionary leadership often arises from those attuned to bodily reality. Many historical reformers lived simply. They walked, fasted, endured discomfort. Whether intentionally or not, they maintained sensory contact. This contact may have sharpened perception. Perception guided judgment. Judgment influenced action. Action altered history. This does not imply asceticism as ideal. Extremes carry their own risks. It suggests balance. Balance between comfort and challenge. Between abstraction and experience. Between speed and reflection. The Ice Age legacy embedded these balances. Modern humanity inherited the biology but altered the context. Context can be redesigned. Designing context consciously may be the defining task of this era. Not grand solutions but subtle adjustments. Restoring variation. Encouraging movement. Allowing pause. Respecting cycles. These changes appear small. Collectively, they shift trajectory. Trajectory determines outcome. Outcomes remain open. The open-endedness itself can provoke anxiety. Yet openness also allows agency. Agency thrives when systems listen. Listening begins with signals. Signals originate in bodies. Bodies speak quietly. Noise drowns them out. Reducing noise is uncomfortable. Silence reveals imbalance. Facing imbalance invites change. Avoiding it postpones reckoning. History suggests reckoning arrives regardless. The question becomes timing and scale. Will adjustment occur gradually, guided by awareness, or abruptly, forced by disruption? The Ice Age survivors endured disruption because they had no alternative. Modern humanity may still have choice. Choice requires clarity. Clarity requires attention. Attention begins not with ideology or prediction, but with sensation. The simplest signals are often the most ignored. A restless body, a tired mind, a persistent unease. These may not be personal failings. They may be ancestral warnings, echoing across millennia, reminding a fur-free species that survival was never about insulation alone, but about staying in contact with the world long enough to respond before it was too late. There is a temptation, when tracing patterns this deep, to search for an ending. A final lesson, a conclusion that resolves tension and restores order. History rarely offers such closure. Instead, it leaves thresholds, moments where direction can still change, but momentum already leans. The Ice Age did not end cleanly. It fractured unevenly across continents, retreating in pulses, advancing unexpectedly, reshaping coastlines, ecosystems, and human roots. Some groups adapted, others vanished. Survival was not evenly distributed. It clustered around flexibility, mobility, and attentiveness. Those who endured were not necessarily stronger or smarter. They were more responsive. Responsiveness depended on feedback. Feedback depended on exposure. Exposure depended on a willingness or necessity to remain open to consequence. The fur-free body was open by default. That openness shaped cognition, memory, belief, and social organization. It demanded cooperation. It punished excess. It rewarded timing. Modern humanity inherited the same body but built layers between it and consequence. These layers offered safety and scale, but they also altered feedback loops. For a time, the buffering worked. Civilizations expanded, knowledge accumulated, comfort stabilized. Yet buffering cannot eliminate consequence. It only delays its arrival. Delayed feedback concentrates impact. This principle appears repeatedly in ecological collapse, financial crises, political upheavals. Systems absorb strain invisibly until they cannot. Then release is sudden. The body experiences this differently. It accumulates microsignals, subtle fatigue, reduced resilience, heightened reactivity. These signs appear long before collapse becomes visible externally. But without cultural frameworks to interpret them, they are dismissed. Dismissal fragments awareness. Fragmented awareness limits collective response. The Ice Age survivors responded collectively because threat was shared and immediate. Modern threats are diffuse, abstract, and unevenly distributed. This weakens coordination. Coordination requires shared reference points. Shared reference points once came from shared environments. Now environments diverge dramatically. Some live insulated lives. Others remain exposed. This divergence complicates empathy. Empathy relies on imagined sensation. When sensations differ radically, imagination struggles. This may explain growing polarization. Different bodies inhabit different realities. Bridging these realities requires more than information. It requires embodied understanding. Embodied understanding cannot be transmitted digitally alone. It requires experience. Experience requires proximity. Proximity has been reduced deliberately, sometimes for valid reasons. Yet prolonged separation erodes social fabric. The fur-free body evolved for closeness, not only physical but situational. Isolation was temporary, not structural. Modern isolation often becomes structural. This shift may be unprecedented. The long arc of human evolution favors connection. Connection distributes risk. Disconnected systems fail individually. The question arises whether modern systems can reintroduce connection at scale without reverting to vulnerability. Technology promises such solutions, yet often replicates abstraction. Virtual presence lacks thermal exchange, shared exertion, synchronized rhythm. These elements mattered deeply. They regulated stress, aligned attention, reinforced trust. Their absence may explain why digital connectivity often amplifies loneliness rather than alleviates it. The skin does not register pixels. It registers warmth, pressure, movement. Ignoring this does not change it. Designing future systems without considering this may lead to persistent misalignment. Misalignment increases strain. Strain demands adaptation. Adaptation can be proactive or reactive. Proactive adaptation requires foresight. Foresight arises from pattern recognition. Patterns are clearer when feedback is timely. Thus, reducing feedback delay becomes critical. This applies beyond environmental issues. Social feedback, economic feedback, health feedback. Shortening loops improves stability. The Ice Age enforced short loops. Modern systems lengthen them. Shortening them intentionally may be the challenge. How might this occur? Through localism that respects scale. Through decentralization that increases accountability. Through rhythms that honor biological cycles. Through education that integrates physical literacy. Through architecture that responds to climate rather than resists it. These are not romantic notions. They reflect constraints of biology. Biology has not changed. The fur-free body still requires variation, still adapts through sensation, still encodes memory through repetition, still regulates emotion through movement and touch, still signals distress when overwhelmed. Ignoring these signals accumulates cost. Cost eventually demands payment. Payment may arrive as crisis or transformation. Crisis narrows options. Transformation expands them. Which path unfolds depends on attention. Attention is limited. It must be directed. Directing attention requires values. Values emerge from belief. Belief was once grounded in sensation. As belief abstracted, it lost some grounding. Regrounding belief does not require rejecting abstraction. It requires anchoring it. Anchors come from lived experience. The Ice Age anchor was survival. Modern anchors must be chosen. Choice implies responsibility. Responsibility is often resisted, yet responsibility empowers agency. Agency counters helplessness. Helplessness fuels fear. Fear drives authoritarian solutions. These solutions promise insulation. Insulation deepens disconnection. The cycle continues. Breaking the cycle requires courage, not in confrontation, but in exposure. Exposure to discomfort. Exposure to uncertainty. Exposure to others. This does not mean reckless vulnerability. It means calibrated openness. The fur-free body once lived this balance intuitively. Relearning it consciously may be difficult. Difficulty does not preclude necessity. The coming decades will test adaptability. Climate instability will increase variability. Economic shifts will challenge security. Technological acceleration will strain cognition. In such conditions, resilience matters more than efficiency. Resilience emerges from redundancy, diversity, and feedback. These principles align with embodied living. Diverse experiences strengthen nervous systems. Redundant social ties distribute stress. Feedback enables adjustment. None of these can be fully simulated. They must be practiced. Practice requires intention. Intention shapes culture. Culture shapes behavior. Behavior shapes outcome. The story of fur loss is not merely evolutionary trivia. It is a lens through which to view modern tension. It reveals that humans are not designed for perfect insulation. They are designed for negotiation with environment, with each other, with uncertainty. Negotiation implies dialogue. Dialogue requires listening. Listening requires slowing down. Slowing down contradicts dominant narratives. Yet speed amplifies error. Error compounds. Compounded error precipitates collapse. Collapse resets systems violently. Gentler resets require foresight. Foresight depends on memory. Memory here is not archival. It is embodied. It lives in sensations that feel familiar yet unexplained. A calm in nature, a clarity after exertion, a relief in shared warmth. These experiences reconnect present bodies with ancient patterns. They hint at alignment. Alignment reduces anxiety. Reduced anxiety frees cognition. Freed cognition enables creativity. Creativity offers solutions. Thus, attending to the body is not retreat, it is groundwork. Groundwork precedes construction. Construction without groundwork fails. The Ice Age survivors built culture on grounded bodies. Modern humanity often builds on abstractions. Rebalancing these layers may define the next phase. Whether this occurs through intentional redesign or enforced simplification remains unknown. History offers both paths. Neither guarantees preservation of current forms. Forms change. Functions persist. The function of the fur-free body was never comfort alone. It was awareness. Awareness of limits. Awareness of opportunity. Awareness of others. This awareness shaped humanity's survival. It may yet shape its future. The question left hanging is simple but not easy. In a world increasingly buffered from consequence, can a species shaped by exposure choose to feel again in time to respond? There is no answer written, only signals waiting to be noticed.